Welcome, everybody. I'm James Tattersfield. I'm the founder and CEO of Polar Insight. I'm thrilled to have you here for today's live session. Thank you very much for joining. It'd be great to hear if you have the chat available or in front of the computer screen today. If you just put something in about where you're calling in from today or where you're viewing the webinar from, it'd be great just to stick that in the chat, see kind of who's joined and where people are calling in from today. I'd love to see those shortly. Today we're tackling a challenge that I know customer experience, user experience, and product leaders all face from time to time. I've faced it previously, I'm sure you have as well. It's about proving the return on investment of customer research. So if you've ever struggled to justify research investment or secure bigger budgets, you're in the right place. So let's jump in and get started. So one of the biggest frustrations that I hear from research leaders is they struggle to justify investment, as I've mentioned. Leadership, and particularly your CFO or any financial decision maker that you're working into, they want hard numbers. And if we can't show impact, research is going to get deprioritized when it comes to allocating budgets. But the truth is that customer research fuels growth. We just need to communicate it differently, and we need to communicate it effectively to ensure that we're talking about what we do in a way that others in our organization can understand and apply to their day-to-day work. So the best way that we've found to do this is the research return on investment formula, which is revenue impact plus retention impact plus cost savings minus research cost. And that's where this formula comes in, essentially, to help break down how research directly contributes to the business goals that your organization has. And the three kind of key levers, as I mentioned, are revenue, retention, and cost efficiency. And if you can tie your research findings to these, then securing budget just becomes so much easier. And I want to run you through a couple of examples just to show you what that looks like in practice across each one of these. So it doesn't necessarily need to be revenue, retention, and cost savings. It could just be one of these as a way of understanding a little bit more about what the potential return of the work that you're carrying out is. So if we start with revenue impact. So research helps us identify opportunities that drive revenue. Whether it's refining product positioning, whether it's improving messaging, whether it's uncovering unmet needs, research helps businesses basically sell smarter. And this is a really useful framing for your CFO or for any financial decision maker within your business. In this example that we've got up on the screen here, the key driver for increased budget is going to come from the increase in conversions, essentially. Everything else is seen as a cost and should be minused off any revenue impact. So the way in which anyone within the organization who is allocating budget towards this type of work is going to be looking at this is, okay, what element of this work is seen as a cost and what element is seen as a revenue driver and has a revenue impact. And really the focus here, and we'll come to this shortly, is when you're crafting projects into case studies that you can then use as examples for future budget allocation, it's really, really important to make the focus on for example, in this case, on the increase in conversions. That's the most important part here. And really, as these projects move further up the organization and more towards budget holders and financial decision makers, essentially it's going to be those outcomes that they are looking at specifically and trying to use them to compare allocating budget or allocating resource to your project versus all of the other different things that they could allocate budget to within their organization. So if we look at another example along the return on investment formula, if we move along to retention. So in this example, we were working with a B2B SaaS firm, so software as a service firm. We were working with them to optimize friction points within their onboarding, which basically meant that they were losing customers. So their customers were churning, and by using clearer language at a particular point in the journey, we're able to reduce customer churn by 18%. So again, this isn't necessarily about acquiring new customers, but it's about improving customer experience, it's reducing churn, and it's increasing the lifetime value of customers, all of which translate into measurable impact, whether that's increased profit over time or whether that's reduced customer acquisition costs because of the need to not replace the people that are coming and churning. And basically, the focus here is about removing friction and customers staying for longer. So if customers stay for longer, they spend more. If they spend more than they would have done, then the research that you've carried out has generated a direct return. And that's the really critical piece to focus on and think about as you are, one, designing research, but also writing up case studies, looking at the type of research you do in retrospect, and really trying to present it in a way that is grounded in real business impact, essentially. The final part of the formula, as we mentioned, is cost savings and efficiency. So this is all about research preventing costly mistakes. So by testing ideas early, as we know, we can avoid expensive missteps in product development, marketing, customer experience, all of which have costs associated with them, and all of which there is alternative avenues where that money could be spent in different ways. So in this case, this is much more focused on reducing your downside risk rather than increasing your upside potential. So rather than we will carry out this research and it will lead to a growth in revenue of 20% across a particular period, this is about saying, if we do this, we'll be able to avoid the potential cost associated with making a mistake. So this is the third of those options for using a return on investment formula: revenue growth, increasing retention or decreasing churn, and then the third one, cost savings and efficiency. And in this particular example, you can see some A/B testing. So by testing both A and B, in this case, it's an email. Route A and email A had a much higher unique open rate, 38% versus 20.9%. As a result, that one was chosen, and that meant that there was the avoidance of choosing B, which would have led to a £500,000 misfire, essentially, and action taken wasn't as high as the upside of route A. So how do we measure this, and what can we do to implement this type of thinking into our day-to-day work? So at Polar Insight, we use something called the TILT method. And this is all about, as I say, making return on investment measurable. And there's 4 steps to it. So the first one is about tracking and measuring the right customer data. Very often within research, we get to kind of step 1 or step 2, but we don't necessarily get to step 3 or 4 of this framework. As I say, the first one is about measuring the right customer data. You then want to identify and pinpoint insights that are going to impact the business goals that you're working on. And it's really, really important to understand what those goals are as early as possible. 3 is going to be about applying those insights to drive revenue, retention, or efficiency. So choosing one of those first sections of the return on investment formula from earlier on that I discussed. And then the 4th one is about tracking again. So track, identify, leverage, track again. And that's about measuring impact over time. And this closes the loop, essentially, and proves continuous return on investment. My advice would be to build this into your research design from the very beginning. So it may take a little bit more time, but it's really, really valuable for a number of reasons. So one is leadership will love it, and being able to connect the work that you're doing to the potential business impact is a surefire way for being able to navigate some of those conversations with a bit more confidence. It's going to help you prove effectiveness of your work. And thirdly, it makes generating case studies much easier, essentially, because you have all of the components that you need to be able to communicate not only what you've done, but the value of what you've done. So you may have carried out some qualitative interviews, a survey, some research films, but really what your leadership and what the financial decision makers within your organization are going to be interested in is the impact of what those things allowed you to do or what they allowed you to avoid. So some of those costly mistakes that we mentioned earlier. Applied in context, again, just so you have an understanding of what this looks like. So one of our clients in the energy sector, they wanted to improve customer engagement by conducting in-depth research. They identified a major pain point in the clarity of their billing. But as a result of identifying that pain point, they adjusted their communication strategy, which led to higher customer satisfaction and ultimately a £700,000 increase in revenue. Now, when it comes to allocating budget to that project, it's much easier for you to say, okay, we're creating a £700,000 increase in revenue. Therefore, we should be spending £70,000 on this research project because the return on investment is going to be 10 times the cost of carrying out the research in the first place. And making that argument in that way is much more compelling than here is the research methodology we're going to carry out. Here are all of the interviews. This is the level of rigor we're going to go into in terms of our research. Because the reality is that whilst that is that's very important and it's a very precise way of demonstrating these things, actually the CFO or the financial controller or whoever's allocating budgets and putting together those budgets in the first place, they know that you're good at research. They know that you're going to be very methodical because you've already been hired into that role, and that's almost their expectation. What they really need to see is why should they invest more money, or why should they invest budget in the first place, essentially, to be able to, why should they essentially choose that route rather than another route like sales or marketing, something which is likely to have a more directly correlated return on investment, or one that's much easier to calculate. So it's just really important basically to frame this in terms of real numbers, real metrics, hard numbers that you can connect to the research that you do, so that people can essentially make that decision between the 3 or 4 options that they have in front of them. So there are 3 actions that you can take after today, and I'd really encourage you to do so as well, because all of this is theoretical unless you put it into practice. It's really important that we apply these theories and we apply this thinking into the work that we do. So therefore, as I say, before we wrap up and when we join, we jump into some questions if there's any from the audience. There are 3 simple actions you can take today. So if you start tracking impact now, you're going to be in a much stronger position when it's time to secure a budget. So I would really urge you to identify a kind of current business challenge that research can help solve, and perhaps maybe choose one which is slightly outside of what you might expect research to support with. So choose something which is a perhaps kind of like a financial challenge for your business, or something related to commercials that may sit a few steps away from the research that you carry on. I want you to start tracking one key metric linked to the impact of your research and apply tilt thinking in your next research project. And a bonus for all of the attendees on the webinar today and everyone who is joining us this morning to watch this presentation, we are offering a free one-to-one research investment strategy session. I know that it can kind of feel overwhelming sometimes, and working through a particular example can really help with these types of things. So I'm offering all attendees a free session, and together let's plan out let's map out a plan essentially to connect your research to revenue, retention, and efficiency. This can be a project that you're currently working on or one that you might be working on in the future. The spots are limited, so please get in touch after this session and we'll get you booked in. And does anyone at this stage have any questions? If you do, please pop them in the chat. I will keep this open for a little while. Feel free to have a look in there. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them now. So we'll give you 30 seconds or so just to do that. Okay, we have one here from John. He wants to go back to the tilt method. So let me just. So just as a reminder, this is just kind of an overview of what that tilt method looks like. It's 4 steps: track the data, identify the insight, leverage the learning, and track the impact. So as I mentioned before, this is really about ensuring that you go the whole way through the process job. So very often we start at stage 1, we move to stage 2, and we don't necessarily keep the kind of underpinnings of the project carrying on for long enough to get to stage 3 and stage 4. So this is all about tracking your data, identifying the insight, then leveraging that learning, but you should really be building that 4th track the impact into the work that you do when it comes to justifying research and the return on investment of the research spend, because ultimately it's going to be the impact and tracking that over time that's going to be the strongest motivator for someone with someone who's the budget holder or the financial decision maker. That's going to be the piece of the puzzle that they're most interested in. So I'd really encourage, if you've got let's say you've got a 4-week project, I would break that down into a 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks across each one of these. Again, if it's a year-long project, do a quarter on each, or at least make sure that proportionately you are building in as much effort and as much focus on tracking the impact of that work, rather than just tracking the data for the research project that you're carrying out. Hopefully that helps. Do we have any more questions at all? Okay, it doesn't look like we do. So my details are up here on the screen. If you'd like to talk about proving the return on investment in customer research and securing bigger budgets, please do get in touch. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. The URL is on the screen right now. And we will also share a recording of this webinar and of this presentation after today. But thanks very much for joining. I really appreciate your time, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks very much.